Is this some kind of joke? Are you deaf, old man? The voice was sharp, laced with the kind of impatient arrogance that only youth and a freshly pressed uniform can produce. It cut through the low hum of the reception area at the Marine Corps recruit depot, turning a dozen heads. Lieutenant Davis, all crisp angles and polished brass, stood with his hands on his hips, glaring down at the man before him. The man was old, his back stooped just enough to soften his height, his face a road map of wrinkles carved by sun and time. He wore a simple faded windbreaker that had seen better decades in a pair of worn denim jeans. In his hands, he clutched a small cracked leather pouch, holding it as if it contained something sacred. The old man, Joseph Carter, didn't flinch. His eyes, a pale but startlingly clear blue, remained fixed on the young lieutenant. They were calm, steady, like deep water that hasn't been disturbed in a long, long time. He seemed to absorb the insult without reaction, letting it dissipate into the air around him. "I asked you a question, Pops," Davis pressed, his voice rising in volume. He was enjoying the attention, playing to the gallery of young recruits and administrative staff who were watching. "This is an active military installation, not a senior center. State your business or I'll have you escorted out." Joseph finally spoke, his voice quiet, but not weak. It was raspy like old paper, but carried a certain resonance that made you lean in to listen. "I'm here for the dedication ceremony for Sergeant Michael Connolly." Davis scoffed, a dismissive, airy sound. He picked up a clipboard from the polished reception desk, running a manicured finger down a list of names. Connolly. Nope, not on the list. We have a few Gold Star families. Some dignitaries, active duty command staff. No grandpas. He looked up, a smirk playing on his lips. "I think you're confused. The VFW hall is a few miles down the road. They probably have free coffee for you." A few of the younger Marines snickered. Joseph's expression didn't change. He simply stood there, a silent, unmovable pillar of patience. This stillness seemed to irritate the lieutenant more than any argument could have. It was a passive challenge to his authority, and Davis wasn't the kind of officer to let that stand. "Look, I don't have time for this," he snapped, his professional veneer cracking. "We have a VIP arriving any minute. Colonel Matthews, the base commander, is personally overseeing the ceremony. I can't have you loitering around here looking like that." He gestured vaguely at Joseph's simple attire. "I was invited," Joseph said, his voice still level, "by Michael's daughter. And I'm telling you, you're not on the list," Davis shot back. He stepped closer, invading the old man's personal space, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate. He was a good foot taller, broader in the shoulders, a specimen of modern military fitness. He noticed a faint faded tattoo on Joseph's weathered forearm, peeking out from under the cuff of his windbreaker. It was a tiger's head, intertwined with some kind of medical insignia, though the lines were blurred with age. "What was your unit, old-timer?" Davis asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Quartermaster Corps. Bet you were a hell of a cook, keeping the real fighters fed." The air in the room grew thick. Even the young Marines, who had been laughing a moment ago, now seemed uncomfortable. There was a line, and the lieutenant was striding right over it. A young lance corporal named Ramirez, standing by the door, shifted his weight, his eyes darting from the lieutenant's smug face to the old man's placid one. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong. Joseph's gaze drifted for a moment, looking past the lieutenant, past the walls of the sterile building to a place far away. "Something like that," he murmured, the words barely a whisper. The vague answer was like fuel on a fire for Davis. He felt his authority being questioned by this quiet defiance. He needed to break him to prove his dominance in front of his men. "Oh, I'm sure it was," he said, his voice loud and mocking. "Every old vet I meet these days was some kind of secret commando. Can't find a single one who just drove a truck. So come on, tell us." What was your call sign back in the day, huh? Pops, sleepy. Let me guess. Grandpa. He leaned in, his face inches from Joseph's, a cruel grin spreading across his face. Let's hear it. What do they call you? The taunt hung in the air, sharp and ugly. The room was utterly silent now, save for the hum of the air conditioner. The young Lance Corporal, Ramirez, felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He'd spent hours in the base archives, reading old declassified reports for a history project. He loved the old stories, the legends of the Corps. Joseph's clear blue eyes slowly refocused on the lieutenant. The far-off look was gone, replaced by an intensity that was almost physical. The air around him seemed to cool, to thicken. The sarcastic question meant to humiliate had instead unlocked a door deep within him, a door that had been closed for 50 years. The sterile smell of floor polish in the reception hall faded, replaced by the damp metallic scent of blood and wet earth. The gentle hum of the HVAC system became the deafening percussive thump-thump of Huey rotors beating the thick humid air of Vietnam. He wasn't in a pristine building in California anymore. He was back in the jungle, in the mud, in the rain. The world a chaotic symphony of screams, explosions, and radio static. He felt the phantom weight of the medical pack on his shoulders, the familiar slap of the M1911 pistol against his hip. He saw faces, young faces, covered in grime and fear. Marines, his Marines. He could hear the frantic voice of a radio operator thin and tinny through the speaker. Man down, man down. Grid square 7-9er. We need a medic. Where is he? And he remembered the reply, shouted over the cacophony of battle. A name that became a prayer for the wounded and a legend for the survivors. A name that meant help was coming, even if it had to run through hell itself to get there. He blinked, the fluorescent lights of the reception hall swimming back into focus. He looked directly into Lieutenant Davis's mocking eyes. The past and present collided in that single steady gaze. When he spoke, his voice was different. The raspy, quiet tone was gone, replaced by something hard and clear. A voice forged in fire and honed by decades of silence. It wasn't loud, but it filled every corner of the room, silencing every breath. They called me Tiger Medic. The name just hung there. 2 simple words. To Lieutenant Davis, they were meaningless, just another nonsensical claim from a rambling old man. He let out a short, derisive laugh. Tiger Medic. Seriously? What is that? Some kind of cartoon? But Lance Corporal Ramirez went rigid. His blood ran cold. Tiger Medic. It wasn't from a cartoon. It was from the whispers, the unofficial histories, the almost mythical stories told by gray-haired master gunnery sergeants in hushed tones. It was a name spoken with a mixture of awe and reverence. The ghost of Casson, a Navy corpsman attached to a Marine recon unit so deep in Black Ops. Their missions were still classified. A phantom who would appear in the thick of a firefight, stabilize the wounded, and vanish back into the jungle, leaving behind a trail of saved lives. Ramirez had thought it was just a legend, a campfire story to inspire new recruits. His eyes widened in dawning horror. He looked from the old man's faded tattoo, the tiger head and the caduceus, to his impossibly calm face. It was real. The legend was real. And he was standing right here in a worn-out windbreaker, being ridiculed by a lieutenant who wasn't even worthy of carrying his medkit. Ramirez felt a sudden urgent need to do something to stop this desecration. At that exact moment, the main doors of the building slid open with a quiet hiss. A man in a perfectly tailored service uniform, with the silver eagles of a colonel on his collar, strode in, flanked by 2 aides. He was tall, imposing, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. This was Colonel Marcus Matthews, the base commander, the VIP. The room snapped to attention. "Room 10 hut," Davis barked, his demeanor changing instantly from arrogant bully to sycophantic junior officer. He spun around, a practiced welcoming smile plastered on his face. "Colonel Matthews, welcome. We have everything prepared for the—" His voice trailed off. The colonel wasn't looking at him. He wasn't looking at any of the saluting Marines. His gaze was locked on the old man in the windbreaker. Colonel Matthews had stopped dead in his tracks, his entourage halting abruptly behind him. The air crackled with a new, powerful tension. The colonel's hard professional mask had dissolved, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock, as if he were seeing a ghost. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, then another. He ignored the saluting lieutenant completely, his eyes fixed on Joseph Carter. He heard the two words that were still echoing in the silent room. Tiger Medic. The name resonated with him, not as a legend, but as a piece of history he knew intimately. His own father, a master sergeant who had served 2 tours in Vietnam, had spoken that name. He'd spoken it with a reverence reserved for saints and heroes. The colonel's voice, when he finally spoke, was a low, stunned whisper that carried more weight than any shouted command. "Tiger Medic." He scanned the old man's face, the clear blue eyes, the faded tattoo on his arm. A flicker of recognition and disbelief crossed his face. "My God, Joseph Carter, is that you?" Joseph simply offered a small, tired nod. "It's been a long time, Marcus." He used the colonel's first name, a familiarity that made Lieutenant Davis's jaw drop. Colonel Matthews seemed to physically deflate, the rigid military posture softening into something else entirely. He looked like a man meeting his childhood hero. He turned his head slowly, his eyes sweeping over the frozen tableau, the sneering lieutenant, the stunned recruits, the palpable disrespect hanging in the air. His face, which had been filled with awe, now hardened into a mask of cold, controlled fury. He locked his gaze on Lieutenant Davis, who had begun to turn a sickly shade of pale. "Lieutenant." The colonel's voice was dangerously quiet, a low growl that promised retribution. "What precisely is going on here?" Davis stammered, his bravado utterly shattered. "Sir, this man, he wasn't on the guest list for the ceremony, sir. I was maintaining security protocol." The excuse sounded pathetic, even to his own ears. "Security protocol?" The colonel took a step towards him, his eyes blazing. "You call publicly humiliating a guest of this base security protocol?" He gestured toward Joseph. "Do you have any idea who this is? Do you have the slightest comprehension of the man you are speaking to?" Davis was speechless, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The colonel didn't wait for an answer. He turned to address the entire room, his voice now booming with the full force of his command. It was the voice of a leader, a historian, a protector of the faith. "Let me educate you, Lieutenant. Let me educate all of you. This man is Corpsman First Class Joseph Carter, United States Navy. Attached to 3rd Force Reconnaissance, MVOG. During the bloodiest years of the Vietnam War." He took a breath, his chest swelling with righteous anger. They called him Tiger Medic for a reason. During the siege of Quezon, his entire 12-man patrol was ambushed, pinned down in what they called the Ghost's Garden. They were outnumbered 10-1. For 3 days, under constant mortar and machine gun fire, this man, armed with nothing but a .45 pistol and his medical kit, ran from man to man, patching them up, dragging them to cover, and holding off enemy assaults. When reinforcements finally broke through, they found Joseph Carter, the sole survivor who could still fight, crouched over the bodies of his fallen comrades, still returning fire. A collective gasp went through the room. The young recruits stared at Joseph, their faces a mixture of awe and profound shame. The quiet old man in the worn jacket suddenly seemed to grow in stature, surrounded by an aura of unimaginable history. The colonel wasn't finished. He pointed a trembling finger at the faded tattoo on Joseph's arm. "That tattoo means he was one of them. One of the originals. He didn't just save his patrol. He repeatedly volunteered to go out on long-range reconnaissance patrols with Marine units who had no assigned corpsmen. He went where the fighting was thickest. There are official reports of him low-crawling 100 yards across an open rice paddy under heavy fire to save a wounded machine gunner. They say he performed an emergency tracheotomy with a pocket knife and a ballpoint pen during a firefight. The official record states he is credited with saving the lives of 54 Marines and Army soldiers, 54. He turned his furious gaze back to Davis for his actions. He was awarded the Navy Cross, the second highest award for valor this country can bestow. He was also awarded a Silver Star, a Bronze Star with Valor, and 3 Purple Hearts. His actions, Lieutenant, are still used as a case study at Quantico and in Navy corpsman training. They are the literal textbook definition of courage under fire. His file was classified for 30 years because of the sensitive nature of his unit's operations. The colonel stepped right up to Joseph, his anger melting away, replaced by a deep, humbling respect. He reached out and gently placed a hand on the old man's shoulder. This man, this hero, this legend of the Corps, was just trying to attend a memorial for one of the men who died beside him. And you, Lieutenant, he spun back to Davis, his voice dropping to a venomous hiss. You called him Grandpa. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence filled with the weight of history and the crushing shame of the present moment. Lieutenant Davis stood frozen, his face ashen. He looked as if the colonel's words had physically struck him. The entire world he had built for himself, a world based on shiny boots, sharp creases, and the authority of his rank, had just been demolished. Colonel Matthews took a deep, steadying breath. He turned back to Joseph, his voice now soft, filled with a raw emotion he rarely showed his men. Joe, Mr. Carter, on behalf of every Marine on this base, I am profoundly sorry. The disrespect you were shown here today is an embarrassment to this uniform. Please allow me to personally escort you to the ceremony. He looked at Joseph, a silent question in his eyes. Joseph's own eyes were distant for a moment, as if seeing the ghosts the colonel's words had conjured. But then he focused on the colonel and gave a slight, forgiving nod. They're just kids, Marcus. They don't know the history. It's our job to teach them. The colonel nodded, his throat tight. He turned one last time to the petrified lieutenant. Davis, you will report to my office at 1600 hours sharp. In the meantime, you are relieved of your duties here. Go to the base library. I want a 5,000-word essay on my desk by morning, detailing the actions of every Navy Cross recipient from the Vietnam conflict. Maybe then you'll begin to understand that honor isn't something you wear on your collar. It's something you earn in the mud and the blood. Without another word, Colonel Matthews gently guided Joseph Carter toward the auditorium, leaving Lieutenant Davis standing alone in the center of the room, the focal point of 100 pairs of accusing eyes. He felt smaller and weaker than he had ever felt in his life. The polished reflection of himself in the gleaming floor seemed to be that of a fool. The dedication ceremony was beautiful. A lone bugler played taps, the mournful notes echoing across the parade ground. Sergeant Michael Connie's daughter, a woman now in her late 50s, spoke eloquently about the father she barely knew. Joseph sat in the front row, the seat of honor beside Colonel Matthews. He didn't speak. He just listened, his hand resting on the small leather pouch in his lap. He was a silent witness, a keeper of memories that no one else in the crowd could possibly comprehend. After the ceremony, as people milled about sharing stories and condolences, Joseph slipped away from the crowd. He found a quiet bench overlooking the parade deck, the same deck where generations of young men had been forged into Marines. He needed a moment of peace. A shadow fell over him. He looked up to see Lieutenant Davis standing there, his hat in his hands. The young officer's face was blotchy, his eyes red. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a deep, gut-wrenching shame. "Mr. Carter, sir," Davis began, his voice cracking. He couldn't meet Joseph's eyes, staring instead at the toes of his polished shoes. There are no words. What I did, what I said. It was inexcusable. I can't. I'm so sorry." Joseph looked at the young man for a long moment. He saw not an enemy, but a boy who had been taught the wrong lessons, who had mistaken authority for wisdom. He saw himself decades ago, full of the same fire and certainty, before the war had burned it out of him and replaced it with something heavier, something more real. He patted the space on the bench beside him. "Sit down, son." Hesitantly, Davis sat. He kept his back ramrod straight, as if still at attention. "You wear that uniform with a lot of pride," Joseph said quietly, not as an accusation, but as an observation. "Yes, sir," Davis mumbled. "It's all I've ever wanted." "There's nothing wrong with that," Joseph continued. "But pride can be a blindfold. It makes you see the uniform, the rank, the shine on the shoes. It stops you from seeing the person inside. You looked at me, and you saw an old man in a cheap jacket. You didn't see the 18-year-old kid who signed up to be a corpsman because he wanted to help people. You didn't see the friends I lost. You didn't see the promises I made to them." He finally opened the small leather pouch he had been holding so carefully. He tipped it over, and a single tarnished silver dog tag fell into his palm. It was dented, the chain long gone. "This was Mike Coney's," Joseph said, his voice thick with memory. "The night before that last patrol, we were talking. He told me if anything happened to him, I had to make sure his little girl knew he was brave, knew he loved her. He gave me his spare tag. He said, 'Don't let them forget us, Doc.'" Joseph looked out over the parade ground. "That's why I'm here, Lieutenant. Not for the medals, not for the glory. I'm here to keep a promise I made to my friend in a muddy trench half a world away. That's a duty that doesn't end when you take off the uniform." He held out the dog tag. "Honor isn't about how people salute you. It's about remembering those who can't be here to salute at all. It's about service and sacrifice and keeping your promises. That's the history you need to learn." Lieutenant Davis stared at the small piece of metal in the old man's hand. He saw the dents and scratches, and for the first time he understood that they were more meaningful than the shiniest metal. He finally lifted his head and tears were streaming down his face. He looked at Joseph Carter at Tiger Medic, and he didn't see an old man anymore. He saw a giant. "Thank you, sir," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for the lesson. I won't forget it. Heroes walk among us every single day, hidden in plain sight. They aren't always in uniform or on pedestals. Sometimes they're the quiet old man in the worn-out jacket, the janitor in the hallway, the grandmother at the grocery store. They carry the weight of their history in silence, seeking no recognition, asking for nothing but a little kindness. The story of Joseph Carter and the arrogant young lieutenant is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't loud and demanding. It's quiet, patient, and forged in fires we can't even imagine. It teaches us to look past the surface, to see the person and not the package, and to treat everyone with the respect they deserve, because you never, ever know when you might be standing in the presence of a legend. We hope this story touched your heart. If it did, please consider liking this video and sharing it with someone who needs to hear this message. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that honor the heroes among